So, what in the world does a super dense philosophical text have to do with a legendary, backstabbing betrayal in 1990s pro wrestling? Yeah, I know, it sounds crazy. I wouldn't have thought to connect them either. But then I found one of the weirdest pairings of articles I've ever seen online. And today, we're actually going to use one to unlock the other.
So picture this. I'm just scrolling through this website, luchaclique.com, and it's an interesting place to say the least. You got music videos, you got some wild conspiracy theories, and then right next to each other are two articles that feel like they're from totally different planets.
I mean, look at this. On one side, you have this incredibly detailed, almost legalistic breakdown of a famous wrestling scandal. And then right next to it, an essay laying out a whole new framework for morals and ethics. The other stuff is wild for sure, but these two, they just do not feel like they should be in the same room.
And that, right there, is the mystery we're going to try and solve. What happens if we take the framework from that philosophy article and use it as a lens to look at the wrestling story? Can a moral system actually help us make sense of one of the most notorious betrayals in pop culture history? Okay, let's find out. So, to crack this case, we have to start with our toolkit. That philosophy article lays out something it calls a moral operating system, which is basically a guide for making tough ethical calls when the stakes are high. And it all starts with this one foundational goal, this axiom. The point of it all is to reduce the suffering we can't control and to create a world where more good things, more joy, more creativity, more knowledge can happen. That's our North Star for this whole system.
And out of that one big idea, you get these four core principles. You can think of them like the apps on your phone's operating system. Each one has a specific job, and we're going to use all four of them to analyze what happened in Montreal.
Okay, first up, empathetic realism. This principle starts with a simple truth. We are all naturally biased towards our own team, our own family, our own tribe. So the moral work, the hard part, is to consciously and logically push ourselves to care about people outside that circle. Second, and this is a huge one, is informational integrity. The whole idea here is that you can't possibly make a moral choice if you're working with lies or bad info. It's impossible. So finding the truth and telling the truth, that's not just a nice thing to do, it's a moral necessity. Number 3 is scalable responsibility. This one is so simple but so powerful. It just means that the more power you have, the bigger your moral duty is. You know, a CEO has a much bigger obligation to act ethically than an entry-level employee. Responsibility grows with power. It scales.
And last but not least, we have epistemic humility. This is basically the system's fail-safe. It's the principle that says you have to stay open to the possibility that you might be wrong. It keeps the whole thing from turning into a rigid, unchangeable dogma and allows it to get better over time. All right, we've got our moral toolkit ready to go. Now let's turn to our case study, the infamous Montreal Screwjob. This was a real-life, high-stakes conflict between the biggest star in wrestling, Bret Hart, and his boss, the owner of the WWF, Vince McMahon.
So let's set the scene. It's the mid-90s, and the WWF is getting absolutely crushed in a ratings war with its main competitor, WCW. Now, WCW is backed by billionaire Ted Turner, and they're just throwing money around, poaching all of the WWF's biggest names. By late 1996, the WWF's number one guy, their champion, Bret Hart, is a free agent. The company is literally on the ropes. And this is where it gets crazy. Look at the choice Bret Hart has in front of him. WCW offers him a mountain of cash, around $9 million for just 3 years. But his boss, Vince McMahon, he comes back with something nobody had ever seen before, a 20-year contract. Basically, a job for life, to go from being a wrestler to being a top executive in the company. So what does Bret do? He says no to the easy money. He chooses loyalty. He signs that 20-year lifetime deal, betting on his future with the company he felt was his home. I mean, it was a massive vote of confidence in a business that was clearly in big trouble. But just 1 year into that new contract, the wheels start to come off. The source material points to financial filings showing that the WWF's parent company lost a staggering $6.5 million in 1997. They were hemorrhaging cash, and suddenly, Bret Hart's massive contract started to look less like a good investment and more like a boat anchor. And this all leads to the moment that shatters everything. In the fall of '97, Vince McMahon sits Bret Hart down and basically tells him the company is broke and that they can't afford to honor that 20-year deal. He essentially tells him, "I can't pay you." And with those 4 words, legally speaking, the contract was broken. Okay, so the deal is officially toast. Now let's do what we came here to do. Let's take our moral operating system and see how the actions of these 2 men measure up against those 4 principles. So what about empathetic realism? Well, honestly, they both get a failing grade here. McMahon's entire focus, his whole circle of concern, was just about saving his company, his tribe. Meanwhile, Bret Hart's focus narrowed to not being publicly disrespected in his home country of Canada. Neither of them could step outside their own perspective and really understand where the other guy was coming from. Now, this is where it gets really complicated. Let's look at informational integrity. That phrase, "I can't pay you," well, that was a breach of contract, no doubt. But here's the paradox. It was also, in a way, the truth. McMahon was being honest about the company's awful financial reality. He was telling Hart, this contract is a toxic asset we can no longer afford. And that brings us to what I think is the most important principle here: scalable responsibility. I mean, who had the power in this situation? It was Vince McMahon, hands down. He was the owner, the boss. He held all the cards, which means he had the greatest moral obligation to find a solution that was fair to everyone. And this is where that last principle, epistemic humility, also comes into play. Both men failed. Neither was willing to admit they might be wrong, which created this impossible stalemate.
And you can really see Bret Hart trying to find that solution. McMahon wanted him to lose his championship belt to his biggest rival in his hometown, which Hart saw as a huge professional insult. But he didn't just slam the door. He came back with options. He said, "I'll lose to anybody else. I'll lose in any other city. Or I'll just forfeit the title to you tomorrow." He was actively looking for a compromise.
All right, we have run this entire messy situation through our moral operating system. So what's the final call? Who was actually in the right? And more importantly, who actually won? And the answer is a complete split decision. Based on our analysis, Bret Hart was legally and morally correct. McMahon broke the contract first, and Hart offered reasonable ways to fix the problem. But who won? Vince McMahon. Absolutely. By betraying Bret, he got out of a crippling contract, he protected his championship, and he accidentally created the evil Mr. McMahon character, which launched his company into the most successful period in its history. And that leaves us with this really tough, really uncomfortable question. McMahon's unethical action led directly to his company's salvation and incredible success. So, can a moral breach be justified if the outcome isn't just good but world-changing? I don't know the answer, but that's a question this moral operating system and probably all of us have to keep wrestling with.